Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Martha Carlin.
Hi, I'm Linda Mitchell, 54-year-old elite obstacle racer, award-winning fitness competitor, gym owner, and author. Welcome to the Sisterhood of S.W.E.A.T podcast, where we will approach the difficult topics of life, interview inspiring guests, and bring empowerment to all. This community is a place where we can be who we are instead of who others want us to be. Let's get started.
A quarter century of probiotic excellence. Essential Formulas Incorporated proudly celebrates 25 years of innovation and leadership in the probiotic industry. Since introducing Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, the gold standard in full-spectrum probiotics in early 2000, we have remained dedicated to advancing probiotic science through research, education, and cutting-edge product development. Over the years, we have expanded our commitment by introducing groundbreaking products designed to nourish the microbiome, both inside and out, such as RegActive and Dr. Ohhira's Probiotic Skincare. As we step into our next quarter century, we extend our deepest gratitude to all those who share our vision of probiotic excellence for better human health. Dr. Ohhira's probiotics are available at natural grocers, Sprouts, Whole Foods, and natural health retailers nationwide. Discover the Dr. Ohhira's difference today.
Welcome back to the Sisterhood of S.W.E.A.T, where we're building strength, resilience, and longevity from the inside out. Today's conversation may completely change how you think about health, metabolism, energy, inflammation, and even aging. My guest today is Martha Carlin, microbiome researcher, systems health entrepreneur, scientific collaborator, and founder of companies focused on understanding how the gut impacts chronic disease and long-term wellness. After a personal health journey changed the trajectory of her life, Martha immersed herself in microbiome science, metabolic research, and endotoxin biology. Her work has helped shape conversations around chronic disease prevention, microbial health, and precision wellness. Today, we're talking about why identical diets create different results in different people, how toxins impact brain and gut health, the overlooked role of microbes, how they play a role in metabolism, and what restoring your internal terrain can mean for longevity. Martha, welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat.
Thanks so much for having me today.
What personal experience led you into microbiome science?
Well, back in 2002, a 44-year-old marathon running, seemingly healthy husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I just could not believe that a young person had an old person's disease, especially somebody who looked so healthy and was so athletic, and it just didn't make sense to me. And I had a background in, I was running like big operations for big companies and working on turnarounds. And so I had sort of a systems thinking mind. And I thought, I think this is a systems problem. And out of school, I was trained as an auditor to never take anything at face value, examine the evidence for yourself. And so that's what I started to do. And I went down this path of teaching myself the science. And I started with food and trying to understand the impact of food because John had been drinking these soy protein shakes that our neighbor was selling every day for about 2 years. So that sent me deep down the rabbit hole of looking at soy and GMO crops and glyphosate and all of that. And then fast forward about 12 years later, I read a book by Dr. Martin Blazer called Missing Microbes, and he was talking about the microbiome. And I was like, I had never heard that term. For anybody who doesn't know, that's the trillions of bacteria, fungi, protists, and bacteria that live in and on our body, and they function as an internal pharmacy to help maintain our health when things are in balance. And later that year, the first paper was published connecting Parkinson's disease and the microbiome, and I quit my job, started funding research at the University of Chicago, and 6 months later funded the Bio Collective and started collecting people's poop in a box.
Let's put it mildly. You talk about terrain renaissance. Explain that concept.
Well, we've really been taught to think about single symptoms or, these very reductionist way of looking at the whole body. Something's wrong. You're looking at one little symptom. You want one little thing, but we are an ecosystem. The human body is an ecosystem. The microbiome is an ecosystem, and they're interacting together. So, this interface of two ecosystems. And what's very important in ecosystems and their health is the terrain. And that terrain is set by the things that go down that pipe and out the back end.
And out the back end. Oh my goodness. Couldn't have put that better. Can you explain in detail? I know people have heard this on my podcast before, but everybody has a fresh take on it. What exactly is the microbiome and why does it matter so much?
Well, one thing that most people are not aware of is that we're actually more microbial than we are human. So, in terms of cell count, there are about 2 microbial cells for every 1 human cell. But the bigger aha out of that whole equation is that in terms of genes, the microbiome has between 100 and 300 times more genes than our human genes. And so the way I like to think about it is, if we're told we have a genetic risk or there's something that's not functioning from a genetic perspective, in all likelihood, that microbiome was performing some or all of that function, but we've lost that microbial function in the microbiome as well because we've done so much damage to the microbiome. So I think about that as a foundational piece of how everything works in the body. And many people just aren't aware of how important the microbes are because they've been taught their entire life we need to kill the microbes.
How can restoring microbial balance influence your health?
Well, I mean, research said so. They they did a project called the Human Microbiome Project from I think it was 2005 to 2012. Massive project, multi centers all over the United States, looking at all parts of the human body and the microbiome in different parts of the body and in different age groups. And from that kind of foundational work, it has just exploded in terms of connecting the microbiome to every organ in the body. There's a gut brain axis, there's a gut liver brain axis, there's a gut axis to every organ in the body. And what we're also seeing is pretty robust evidence of a connection to many of our chronic diseases that involve inflammation because the microbiome, while it can be doing great beneficial things for us when it's out of balance, it can be producing a lot of inflammatory triggers.
So, explain to me again then, what did you do with your research and how did this end up helping your husband with his Parkinson's?
It actually did. So I founded the company in 2015 and we were collecting samples and doing sequencing, and we made the samples available to scientists around the globe. In September of 2016, John was actually walking with a cane and not able to navigate a crowd very well. And we went to the World Parkinson's Congress, and there were some researchers there showing data from a scientist that showed in a mouse model the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins that were causing Parkinson's and actually pull them out and clear them from the brain. And they were looking for people to start taking mannitol and just reporting whether they noticed any change. And, I was like, wow, that is really interesting because I had
Yeah.
also, microbes are very much involved in fermenting different sugars. And so I came back and
Okay.
bought a mannitol chemistry book. It was just a little skinny book, but I started reading about this amazing molecule. It's a very powerful free radical scavenger. It's an osmoprotectant. But one of the most interesting things in that little book was that there are a handful of bacteria that convert glucose and fructose through fermentation into mannitol. And we don't use mannitol. We actually pee it and poop it out. Most of what comes in goes out. Then, glucose and fructose are what are called glycating sugars.
Yeah.
So they can basically accelerate aging, but mannitol is not a glycating sugar. And so I had a friend who was a fermentation chemist and had about 20 years in the probiotics industry. And I sat down with him and I said, could we put a team back into the gut that could do this, like put this process back so that he could actually convert these sugars in his gut? Because I also knew that John and other people with Parkinson's that I had been talking to over the years had really bad sugar cravings and chronic sweet tooth. And those sugars, glucose and fructose, feed the inflammatory bacteria. So in about 90 days, he was able to help me put together this team of 8 bacteria that put a factory back into John, so to speak. Within 30 days, he was no longer walking with a cane, and he was able to
Wow.
navigate our daughter's the crowd
Amazing.
at her college graduation about 4 months later. And we had data from before from the research at the University of Chicago on his microbiome, so we could compare how his microbiome was moving back to the healthier human microbiome profile. And so he was really stable. There was something called the UPDR score, and his UPDR score improved by about 40% over the course of the first year he was taking the probiotic. And it
Wow.
stabilized at that improved level and didn't move for 4 years until he got COVID. And then
Wow.
COVID was,
So my sponsor for the show is Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, which is fermented for 3 to 5 years, and they have a postbiotic and probiotic, and I forget the name for the other one. Don't
yeah,
shoot me.
I love Dr. O'Hara's. I have told many people about it because it's an amazing, because it's that concept of a team that they're putting together
Yeah.
with the right nutrients, and they're fermenting it for a long time. Now, for somebody who makes probiotics, I'm like, in my head, I'm going, wow, that's a complicated supply chain. If you run out and you have to wait 3 years for another batch.
Well, they got it down to a
Yeah.
science, and basically, you don't have to refrigerate it, and you're not gonna get SIBO, like, where you get to when you're taking somebody's 50,000,000,000 this, 50,000,000,000 that, and it, like, overpopulates in your upper intestine. I just think, sometimes people think a lot is better,
Yeah.
and it's not always the case, and actually just knowing like you were talking about 8 bacteria specifically for the Parkinson's. Can you list those off to me? I would really be fascinated to know what they are.
So one of them is Leuconostoc mesenteroides, which you don't typically find in the standard probiotic market, which is that's found in almost all fermented foods, however. It's the first microbe that kind of goes in and sets that terrain for the wider fermentation. And so, that's one of our key players. We have a Lactobacillus plantarum that is ours that we actually fermented from wild elderberries, and most lactic acid bacteria are actually killed by glyphosate, and that particular strain actually was resistant to glyphosate at very high levels and is able to break down not only glyphosate, but its byproduct AMPA, which is harder to get rid of. So those are 2 of the big players. We have Lactobacillus reuteri, and that's an organism that's been made famous by Dr. William Davis of the wheat belly supergut. That's a strain of bacteria. That is one of the mannitol producers. And it's also involved in stimulating oxytocin production,
Okay.
happy hormone.
Yeah.
So we have a Pediococcus acidolactici, which is proteolytic. You will often find that in fermented meats. And let's see, we have a Bacillus subtilis. That is a spore based bacteria. So if you hear people talk about soil based or spore formers, Bacillus subtilis is in that category. And that strain has been studied in increasing muscle mass. But one of the interesting things about Bacillus subtilis, an older common name for it was hay bacillus, because we used to be outside, in the grasses, in the air, and breathing these organisms in. And so, we don't get the same kind of exposure to those anymore. We have Lactobacillus paracasei, and let's see, there's 2 that I'm missing here.
Okay,
Oh,
so
the
you have a lot
bifidobacteria.
of different
Yeah,
ones.
2 bifidobacteria. So bifidum and
We
bifidolongum.
have
And
that,
of
yes.
and
Mhm.
those are very important longevity and baby microbes. They produce something called plasmalogens that are very beneficial for the brain. And that whole team together is essentially cross feeding each other and allowing you to have some sustained effect for about 12 hours.
Now, what are your substrains? Do you have substrains
You mean like
in your
the
in
Like,
your
you mean like number, or
um,
so
so
it's
you have
Lactobacillus,
yeah.
like we have Lactobacillus plantarum TBC 036, which is our strain, but I'm not sure I understand the substrain question.
It's basically like if you list what your bacterias are, generally you want to list the
Well,
substrains because
Well, some of them will. Some of them, sometimes you will have something that says subspecies such and such, but that's not always the case. So that's in certain circumstances, you will have one that might say Lactobacillus plantarum subspecies such and such. But in most instances, you're not going to have that long third part of the string.
because basically it's like a unique identifier that tells you that one or more clinical studies back the strain being used.
Well, they do that in different ways. So you can do it by numbering it or by like
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
Bacillus subtilis is DE111. It's got a trademark and all the data behind it. So you will see the numbered, people put the number on it. And then you can often through that number, you can figure out where it's coming from in the supply chain. Because the vast majority of probiotics on the market today, I would exclude Dr. O'Hara from this, but are coming from just three suppliers, three major global suppliers. So if you go into a store and you see a shelf full of probiotics, most likely they're coming from one of those top three suppliers and they're popping it in the bottle.
Yeah, Dr. O'Hara's has like 14 different
Yeah.
strains, and it's just
Yeah.
interesting to hear because I mean, they also have Regactive, they have some other products. So not every probiotic, prebiotic, postbiotic deals with the same thing. And that's what people need to understand is really to do their homework on their probiotics. Because like what you're talking about, that would be very specific, you
Yes.
know, for Parkinson's. And
Well, we actually did a clinical trial in diabetes because Parkinson's is a little bit harder to study, but there is a product, a Lactobacillus plantarum on the market right now by a company called Neurali that has done several clinical studies in Parkinson's, and they use that UPDR score, I think, is one of their measures. The tough thing about that is it's a subjective, like every doctor is scoring it. So it's a little bit subjective, whereas we knew it was affecting sugar. So we studied it in diabetes because there are a lot of clear clinical markers that you can look at. And one of those that we actually looked at is a clinical marker. Well, it's not agreed upon, but it's in animal studies to cause Parkinson's. And that's lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin. And so we measured the impact on endotoxin in serum and in the microbiome and had statistically significant improvement in endotoxin. The diabetes, also 60% of people with Parkinson's have some level of insulin dysregulation or insulin.
okay. Which makes perfect sense to me. What people don't realize is even if you don't eat a lot of sugar, I mean, you may be getting it, of course, in many other ways. Let's face that with whatever you're eating, your pasta, your vitamins could even have sugar, your whole grain cereal, your whole wheat bread, your white bread, your pasta your potato was acting like sugar. Your vegetables, when you went to certain restaurants, had sugar. And so just realizing how many places, and besides your natural sugars, that you could be getting sugar. And then if you're not metabolizing sugar, even if you're not taking it in, that's another issue. Taking a good probiotic, and my favorite definitely is Dr. O'Hara's. I would not have them as a sponsor if it wasn't. I'm very picky. It really does help you with being able to metabolize the sugars. And I think that not being able to metabolize them, having this insulin resistance, getting this brain fog, getting bloated, getting like all of those type of symptoms, you got to start looking at your sugars. So what do you say to that,
Well,
Martha?
yeah. Another piece of the puzzle that many people may not realize. Richard Johnson wrote about this in his book Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, and his research actually showed that when we're under stress, and let's face it, who's not under stress right now? When we're under stress,
Exactly.
we produce fructose in our body. So you may think, okay, I'm on a
Yeah, me
low
too.
sugar diet, I'm on a low carb diet, but I'll guarantee you're under stress. I don't know anybody who's not under stress right now. And you're producing fructose.
Oh my gosh. producing it, eating it. And I hate to say it, but I know a lot of people, even though I've said this many times on the podcast, still don't know that they could be eating an all carnivore diet and their body can totally turn their protein and metabolize it like a carb.
Yeah. Well, through that glycogen pathway, it will convert to glucose.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's amazing what your body can do. I do teach people though, like if they're doing low carb and they're really low energy, they could get some MCT oil and that just goes straight to your liver, just like a carb. Your body can learn how to metabolize fat for energy. And I actually have my my gal that's 62 that came to me a couple years ago. She's climbing her 3rd set of mountains here soon, and her energy comes a lot from fats, not just carbs. And it's just been an amazing transformation. Amazing, just overall, just what all she could do. She just really did it for health and because she had a goal of wanting to climb mountains, and now she has a physique that people would be like, "Are you sure you're 62? Are you sure?" I told her the other day when she came in, she had my jacket on that says, basically, that consistency breeds success. From the back, she had a little ponytail. I was like, "You look like a young girl." I was just like, "Whoa." But I just think if people really understood how much what you put in your body is not a garbage can, and everything has chemical reactions, and you and your background doing all this research, I mean, you're like, just this is just one tip of the iceberg where you're showing how important it is to study, to do your homework, not to just trust somebody that wants to give you a magic pill or a prescription. And, with your husband, they would have what? Prescribed him just tons of drugs, basically.
Yeah, drugs. I mean, it's a disease where they start out with one drug and it ends up causing side effects that layer on more drugs. So there's a long line of drugs. And he, after we fixed his gut and dealt with some things, I think at that time he might have been on 5 different medications, and he ended up cutting back and was down to one medication that he was taking primarily during those last 6 years.
And, I think it's so important for people to realize, like, I had, like, a primary cardiologist on here. I mean, triple board certified by Harvard, you name it, in the industry forever. And I was asking him about nattokinase because there's a lot of good studies on it and how it, can help to, keep you from blood clots and calcification in your arteries and, all the things. Of course, do your homework. But he said, you know, yeah, you'd heard a lot of good things about it, but you're never gonna really have great studies on it because it doesn't make the money.
Money.
And
That's
that's what people need to recognize is that natural supplementation, it can do great things for you. They may not have as many studies, just you have to realize, again, that a lot of times it boils down to money. I hate to say it,
yeah.
but it does.
It does. The mention of nattokinase is interesting too, because Bacillus subtilis, which I said, we have in that formula, and that's in all of our formulas too. Bacillus subtilis is a nattokinase producer. It's essentially one of the main microbes in natto, the fermented soybeans.
Amazing. I'm taking my natto.
Yeah.
I
So,
definitely am.
there's a great little book. You can get it used. It's out of print, but it's called The Life Bridge: The Way to Longevity with Probiotic Nutrients. And it's a skinny little book, but it explains how microbes and the fermentation process of microbes make inorganic matter or minerals bioavailable or more bioavailable for us to be able to use them better.
Yeah, and that's the key.
Yeah, microbes are
Because sometimes, I hate to say it too, but you like you said earlier, it comes out the other end or the front end. Like,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
sometimes things don't make it past your gut. So I would say also that's also why it's important to have a healthy gut.
Yes, and that's you hear more about people talking about leaky gut these days. I mean,
Yeah,
in the last
tons.
decade, that's kind of become pretty high level of awareness. But so that layer that lines the gut it's coated with something called the glycocalyx, which is a sulfated glycocalyx endothelial surface layer. So the bottom part of it, the glycocalyx, is primarily hyaluronic acid, and the little fuzzy hairs that stick off of it are sulfated polymers, a little bit like seaweed, that are negatively charged. And they're sort of sorting like what nutrients are allowed in and what trash is coming out. And so if that gets damaged, things get across that shouldn't get across, and you're not able to uptake nutrients the way you would normally be able to take. And that coating coats every cell in the body. So it's your blood-brain barrier, your cardiovascular system is lined with it. Everything is lined with this fuzzy layer sugar polymer, basically.
Why is the glycocalyx so important?
Well, it's like a sensing complementary neural network. So, it's in your lungs. So it's also part of what is allowing the oxygen, oxygen and nitrogen for breathing in, and carbon dioxide, the waste that's coming out. It is our protective layer. It is our sensor, and it is, I would say, sort of the traffic highway system, because it changes shape depending on what it's coming in contact with and what it knows it needs to do with that, whether it's something it has to stop from going across or allow through, or it needs to let something out of the cell.
Why can two people eat identical meals and have completely different blood sugar responses?
So that goes back to the microbiome too. There was some very nice research. I think it was Mayo Clinic and scientists from Weitzman in Israel. They studied about 2,500 people, and they looked at their microbiomes and their blood sugar over time, and essentially found that there's a very different, depending on what your microbiome is, it's going to have a big impact on whether or not your blood sugar rises or not. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because I made a blood sugar altering probiotic. So, it's been a while since I've looked at that study, but I bet if I went back and looked at that study, there's some overlap on the people who are able to eat carbohydrates and not have excessive blood sugar, because we actually did our clinical trial we did in Cuba, where they eat a fairly high carbohydrate diet. They don't have a lot of protein choice. And it had a significant impact on blood sugar and, those metrics. It goes
Well, your
back to what you
vegetables and things can have, a lot of probiotic too,
Yes.
not just taking, in a
Well,
probiotic.
and that's an interesting thing too, because I write a lot about fermented foods and making, give people recipes for how to
Yeah,
ferment, beet
100%. Yes.
kvass or fire cider or something like that. But in the grocery store, a lot of like, ginger or turmeric or some of these roots, a lot of things get irradiated to like kill the bacteria.
Right.
And so,
They killed off the good stuff.
yeah, so sometimes if you're trying to make homemade ginger ale,
Sure.
you do that with a piece of ginger. But if you use a conventional piece of ginger, because it's coming from overseas, it's often been irradiated and there's no bacteria on it to initiate that fermentation. So if you're going to do anything like that, you need to be sure that you're getting organic that hasn't been irradiated.
Wow. Wow. It's just so fascinating. So when we're talking about this with the gut, two people different, metabolizing sugar differently, how much does your blood type play into that?
Ooh, now that's not one I can answer for you.
Okay.
Although, we're doing a little study right now. We're not measuring blood sugar, but we are doing a little study with a group of people with Parkinson's, taking the probiotic, a humic fulvic mineral supplement, and a supplement that supports the glycocalyx, to see how that, changes just their general daily life, their digestive health, how they feel, do they have energy, all of that. And there were several people in there that have diabetes. So, yeah, anyway, and we had, in the testing that we did, we had to get their blood type. So I have some data on that, but I've never looked at that. There's some really interesting research from a woman named Susan Sumner at University of North Carolina, who has her work's not necessarily on blood sugar, but it is on blood type with susceptibility to certain pathogens. So different blood types have different susceptibility to different pathogens. So I think that would also connect to the endotoxin, that those inflammatory components of bacteria, depending on what your blood type is.
So when we're thinking about the gut and we're thinking all about the microbiome, the blood sugar, what then is microbial enzyme capacity?
Well, so, you hear people talk about digestive enzymes and that sort of stuff. Well, microbiomes are the microbes in the gut are producing a lot of those enzymes. Enzymes for energy production, enzymes for digestion, enzymes for, breaking down proteins. So having, a nutrient dense diet, because the microbes and us, neither one of us can make enzymes properly without the appropriate nutrients. So enzymes are powered by different minerals. And so if, our food has become very mineral depleted, in large part because we monoculture and we grow the same things over and over and over in the same soil. And we use glyphosate pretty widely in agriculture
Yeah,
now, and
totally.
that binds minerals. And
Mhm.
so it makes it more and more difficult for us to actually have the minerals that power those enzymes. Magnesium is a great example. There are 300 enzymes that require magnesium to function properly. You might be able to replace it with a different ion, but it's not going to have the efficiency and the effect that magnesium has in that enzyme.
I like bioptimizers for magnesium because they give you not just one strain of magnesium, but I believe it's at least 7 different
I
ones.
think there's a I'd take that one also.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent. And magnesium is one of the things that you really leach out, and especially if you're an exerciser or an athlete, even more so. So important. Let's talk a
Also
little.
stress. Stress will also deplete your
100%, and we're all under stress, it
yeah.
seems, all the time,
Mhm.
and even the people that think they're not under stress, they're just used to the stress they've been carrying. How can poor sleep negatively affect the microbiome balance?
Well, they're interrelated. So we need tryptophan for quality sleep, and the microbiome is so the aromatic amino acids tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine are either made by bacteria or we have to eat them in food. So we don't make those amino acids. So poor sleep will disrupt. There's lots of research showing how poor quality sleep impacts the microbiome. A broken circadian rhythm impacts your sleep quality, and then your sleep quality further impacts the microbiome. So it's kind of this
Yeah,
vicious cycle if you're
yeah,
not quality sleep. And one of the best ways to reset your sleep
mm,
clock is, getting morning light and watching the sunset, because that's part of what is not only setting your clock, but it's setting the clock of the microbes in your body. But we did also produce a team of microbes that help support that bacterial tryptophan and bacterial melatonin production for sleep, because, so many people have sleep problems.
okay, because that is a huge problem, but I think a lot of it is not preparing yourself at night for sleep because you're still on your screen, and that could charge you up, like, that charges you up. Your brain then, is just awake.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And that was actually something I also noticed with my husband. After he had COVID, the system was not very stable after that. And so he had hypersensitivity to supplements, to different things, but blue light in particular was it was just really unsettling. Blue light and the light quality at dusk. And ultimately, I actually have a book coming out called Connected, that is my 20 some odd year journey with John and the science. And one of the things that I talk about in there is the impact of vision and blue light and what that does to the eyes and the signals and how all of that gets disrupted.
Well, it's so important. Now, when we're talking about the circadian rhythm, you answered a lot of the questions I was getting ready to ask. But, just to really set it concretely in people's minds that are listening, let's say their circadian rhythm is broken. They're seeing four walls all day, they're at work and maybe they don't even have a window. What can they do to reset, like you said, the clock, reset their circadian rhythm? Specifically, give me just 3 quick tips.
I mean, the most important thing is getting up and getting out before the sun rises and watch the sunrise. Even if it's just 5 minutes, that is a signal to your body. Another quick thing you can do is get blue light blockers. These glasses that I have on are, I don't know if you can see, sometimes you can see the reflection. They reflect a good portion of the blue light, or you can get the, really dark blockers at night that are red tinted. And you want to stay off your phone. The blue light coming off your phone, you want to stay off of that within 2 hours of bedtime.
Oh,
And that's
yeah, for sure.
really hard for people to do because we've been so ingrained into using that phone. But set the
Mhm.
phone down, go plug it in for the night and walk away from it. And you'll be amazed if you just do the morning sunlight and get rid of that phone for a week, you will start to see a huge difference in your sleep.
I rarely ever look at it before bed anymore like I used to, because it just seems that I then stay away. I've really noticed it. I'm sensitive to light even. Like, I don't like it. I like our new lighting in our bathroom because it's softer. I used to hate it when my husband had, like, I don't know, I feel like they were 100-watt bulbs, but they were bright in our bathroom. And when he would turn them on right before bed, oh my gosh, I'm like, no. And I don't want a lot of loud noises, a lot of ruckus right before I'm going to sleep because I'm winding down, my system's winding down. Now, when we were talking about the light, if I'm at my studio, with my first client's at 5:30, can I just then open up all of the curtains so I can see the sun coming up? Is that gonna or do I need to be outside?
It's better to be outside. I will say,
Okay. I'll
opening
be
up the
like, "Let's
curtain.
go outside for
Yeah,
5 minutes."
yeah, take them outside for 5 minutes
You know,
because
reset your clock.
most of the windows that we have today, they sell them for energy efficient. They're basically blocking the light that is the light you actually need for your signal. So, it's better to go outside. So, make them go outside and do jumping jacks outside
You
or
know what?
something.
I'm
Yeah,
totally gonna be like, "Fire drill, let's run around the building."
yeah,
No.
yeah. I mean, you could do that. It'd be a fun little game.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. Generally, I'm home for the sunset, so now I just gotta work that little ditty in, and I love all these beautiful tips you're giving us today. What is, I guess, something, if somebody wants to improve their gut health today, where's the first place they should start?
One of the first places I tell people to start is with good quality water. Most people do not realize our water systems were designed over 100 years ago and they were designed to deal with bacteria. And
We
they
need
have
some.
not they have into being able to deal with all the chemicals that come into our wastewater systems. So, your neighbor takes an antibiotic or an antidepressant or, whatever drug, antipsychotic, and we metabolize those, but many antibiotics are peed out. A good percentage of them are peed out in not fully metabolized. And so that goes into the wastewater. There's some environmental working group has some data, I think from 2012 on 20 major US cities and essentially the pharmaceutical pollution in the water. So you want to have good clean water.
Mm,
So have a nice filter. And
mhm.
then when you're filtering the water, of course, you're taking out all the minerals too when you're taking out all that pharmaceutical pollution. So you've got to add back minerals. So that is, if people ask me if there's one thing I can do, it's that because you've got to get the mineral nutrients back in and you've got to get water that is hydrating you, that is not polluted with chemicals.
Wow. I mean, that is another important one. I had somebody on from Beam Minerals
Yeah,
talking all about
Caroline.
how, yes, Caroline, um, it restored like her bone health, like her, just even like her gum health, like, and
I'm drinking Beam right here in my.
oh my gosh, I love Beam. I love Beam. I literally, am gonna make sure I had it sitting on my counter, but my husband must put it away. I have been setting it out so I don't forget to take it every day because just having those minerals That's so amazing for your health because 'cause they're stripping them all out of the water pretty much, I think, and,
Yeah.
like you said, your water is important, and it's also important to get your electrolytes, all the things, so important. And I just wanna ask you, is your husband fully recovered or
No, so he had COVID at the end of 2021. And he had pretty severe long COVID, so it was a major setback. We did a lot of things and got him in pretty good shape because our daughter got married later that summer, and so he was able to walk her down the aisle and was feeling pretty good. But then, um, in 2024, he went on a fishing trip with some of his fishing buddies, and when
Mhm.
he came back from that, we think he may have either gotten COVID or something else again, and he already had a pretty fragile system.
Mm,
He had a pulmonary embolism in September and passed away in
okay, okay.
2024.
So sorry to hear that. So sorry. But, the good did come out of some of it. Like, you have probably helped millions you're gonna help millions of people with their Parkinson's, and you did such a good job. You're such a good wife. I was just, like, so impressed that you quit your job to really, dive into this. That's so, like I just
Crazy.
it touched touched my heart, as I'm sure everybody that's listening. What are you excited about for the future of microbiome science?
I am just really excited about the possibilities of how microbial solutions can help people. And we didn't talk about fecal transplants, but they're a pretty amazing tool for things like a C. diff infection. They have studied it in Parkinson's, but the one that came from the bottom up did not do as well as the one that came from the top down. I think that's an indicator that the problem is in the small intestine. There are a lot of different groups looking at fecal transplants. There's, I think his name is Mark Adams in Arizona, who's looking at fecal transplants in autism and having some good results. So in that case, you're replacing like a whole ecosystem. So I think that's really promising. And I have heard of some research where fecal transplants have shrunken tumors by a significant amount in a very short window of time. And then I've actually been working with a Dr. Tom Dow for the last 4 years on a product we're going to bring to market later this year based on a strain of bacteria called Deetsia that is very effective against what MAP infection, which is Mycobacterium avium paratuberculosis, and that has been associated with both Crohn's and colorectal cancer. So very excited about that.
Wow, okay. I wanna hear more about that. When you have more, you can come back on. I know
Okay.
several people with Crohn's. I would love to be able to give them some kinda hope and help there. This has been wonderful today. I have thoroughly enjoyed how knowledgeable you are on this topic. And, sincere if you were like, well, that's not really my lane. I really appreciated that so, so much. And you reminded us that health is bigger than calories, bigger than willpower, and bigger than quick fixes in our bodies, our ecosystems. Sleep matters, stress matters, environment matters, and the invisible world inside us may be shaping more than we ever imagined. Thank you so much for helping us understand how restoring balance internally can create transformation externally. And to everybody listening, remember your strongest chapter might still be ahead. Keep showing up, keep believing, and keep moving toward the life you deserve. And can you tell us where they can get in touch with you, Martha?
Sure. There's a couple of places. So our BiotiQuest website, that's BiotiQuest.com. And I write a lot on the blog there. I share recipes for fermented foods and other ways that you can help your microbiomes. I have a Substack called Martha's Quest, and I write about larger environmental impacts, partly from a Parkinson's perspective, but from a broader chronic disease and what's happening in our food system perspective. And then I have a book about poop. It's called My Search for the Poop Perfect. It's a little book, but you will learn a lot in funny ways about how important going every day is, and that's available on Amazon. And then my new book, Connected, is coming out June 23rd.
My gosh, you're taking me back to my days when I taught on the Cruise to Lose with dear Anne Louise Gittleman.
Yeah, I've talked to Anne Louise.
Yeah, she would talk about how important she would explain people don't understand. It matters if you have a floater or a sinker. And that's as far as I'm taking it on this podcast. But if you
Get the
get
book.
this book, you can find all about why that it matters what's
Yep.
coming out the back end, because it tells you a lot about what's going on inside. So anyway, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Linda. I enjoyed it.
And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Sisterhood of Sweat. Make sure to write, review, follow us on Instagram. And as always, keep on keeping on. Bye, everyone.
And I hope that all of our listeners have enjoyed this podcast. And if you guys have really enjoyed this, please review us in iTunes and also share this episode with your friends and your loved ones. Thanks again for listening to the Sisterhood of Sweat.